So tonight's Torah portion, as was said, is Vayigash. Vayigash, which means then he drew near. Basically, he drew near. He approached. It's referring to Joseph as his brother Judah approached him. So tonight's Torah portion, which is Genesis chapter 44, 18 to 47, 27, has to do primarily with this incredible approach. When Judah defied the natural man that was in him and did something that was totally counterintuitive, which was to go before this great right-hand figure of Pharaoh. And that's what Joseph represented. A great, awesome leader. So, this is the essence of tonight's Torah portion. Right at the center of it is the whole story of Judah's approach. The story of Judah's approach actually began two Torah portions ago. When Judah was confronted by his sin, you know the sin of Tamar, right? When he was caught or uncovered, he was discovered, I think I should say, as someone that was unrighteous because of his expectation that his daughter-in-law Tamar should have been burnt, when in fact he was guilty of sin. Right? You know the story. And so what was the sin that Judah committed? He went into a temple prostitute. Was that the sin? No. The sin was that he refused to give Tamar to Shelah, or to give Shelah to Tamar. Shelah was his final son. And his responsibility, according to the custom now, and remember, he was living as a Canaanite. He was worshiping as a Canaanite. He was marrying into Canaanite families and so on. So for all practical purposes, Judah was living as a Canaan. What was the motivation behind that? What was the cause, I guess I should say? Why would Judah, son of Israel, leave his brothers? Because that's how that chapter begins. And Judah left his brothers and went and lived with a Shulamite who was a Canaanite. What happened? Well, I think it has to do with the treatment of Joseph. Because the story of Judah's departure and falling away, actually, from his brothers and from the faith of Israel came after the story with Joseph. So it's evident and obvious that Judah had a bit of a problem with the family. The family was a bit dysfunctional. And he perhaps said that I don't want to be around this anymore. I can't believe what has happened. Reuben, with my father's concubine, Judah, Levi and Simeon, what they did with Shechem, and now this whole story with Judah, with Joseph, so he's gone. And then he's confronted by his daughter-in-law, whom he refused to give to be the wife of Shelah. And his sin was, in fact, that. When he was confronted with the sin, we see an immediate humbling in Judah. He acknowledged his sin. Obviously, he repented. The repentance is obvious. And then in the very next chapter, we see that Judah is once again with his brothers. So this is the beginning of that approach, that event, this event that we're looking at tonight, where Judah would approach his brother Joseph, even though it was perhaps, again, like I said, the most counterintuitive thing for him to do. But he did. And that is because he was prepared as a leader. God was working in Judah's life to prepare him for this event. Everything points to this one occasion when Judah pressed forward and laid himself down before Joseph. As far as Judah was concerned, this was the end of his life. He was literally giving his life for his brother and for his father, because he knew that if his brother Simeon had been kept by Joseph, that would have been the end of Yaakov, of Israel. So he laid his life down. And so that's what we're going to see tonight. This is the point where Judah becomes a leader. But the events of Tamar that goes all the way back is all pointing to this one event, this one pivotal moment. And this is what we're going to look at tonight. So the story begins, or the Torah portion begins, in chapter 44, verse 14. Actually, verse 18. And so this is the beginning of the portion. Let's read in verse 18. Then Judah approached him and said, O my Lord, may your servant please seek a word in my Lord's ears, and do not be angry with your servant, for you are equal with Pharaoh. So this is Judah stepping out, making himself vulnerable to ultimate judgment, but he's doing it because he is acting on behalf of his brother Simeon and Benjamin and, of course, Israel as well. So you know the story. What happens? Judah intervenes at this point. And this was actually pleasing to Joseph, the second to Pharaoh, and Joseph reacted. And Joseph, of course, once he saw Benjamin, he called for a banquet. He brought out all the food. He gave Benjamin five times as much food as everyone else. It was a wonderful time, a wonderful banquet. The brothers of Joseph now are saying, what is this about? We don't quite understand this. They were a bit perplexed over it. But they went along with it, and the time came for them to leave. And what happened? As they were on their way back to the land of Israel, what happened? Joseph had put his cup in the bag in Benjamin's bag. And, of course, this created another scenario where, of course, now Joseph is saying, well, your brother is going to stay with me. Your brother Benjamin is going to stay with me as a result. So, tonight's Torah portion also seems to indicate that Joseph, like I said earlier, Joseph wasn't exactly sure about how to execute this entire stream of events. It was one event after the next. It started when Joseph suddenly recognized that his brothers were coming to Egypt for food, for sustenance. It's apparent when you read it in its full representation that Joseph didn't actually know what to do, and that he trusted God every step of the way. He acted spontaneously, but not really in his own spontaneity. He heard from God. God led him. And there are times when you can sense confusion in Joseph, him not knowing what to do. Have you ever been in that place? I think we've all been in that place. Many, many times we experience places in our lives where we know that God is leading us, but we don't know what's the next thing to happen. In many cases, we don't know how things will be solved. We're in a predicament where we just don't know how this will ever work out well. But we trust him. And he leads us. And not only does he lead us, but he lets us know that he's leading us. But only as we step forward. I've been there many, many times. Many times. This week, for instance, just an example, I was over at Barry's hotel room, Barry and Meyer and Isaac, and he showed me that the special chair that Isaac is carried about in was broken, and that it was literally rocking back and forth, and that every time they took him out in that chair, it was a hassle because they couldn't move it without it swinging up like this. And he looked at me and says, "Can you fix this?" I'm like, "No." I'm thinking to myself, there's absolutely nothing I can do with this. So I told him, "You probably need parts for this. There's nothing I can do for this. I wish I could." But then the Spirit of God said to me real clearly, "You can fix this. You got tools in your van. You can fix this." And once I heard that voice that I know well because I've been there many, many times, I didn't know how I would be able to fix it. I had no clue, no notion. I said, "Okay, let me take a look at it." So I bent down, I looked at it, and I saw how hopeless it was. The whole mechanism was broken. I didn't know how in the world could I possibly fix this. But I had already begun to believe. So by the end of the visit, I had it fixed. But not me, because it was God. It was God. God gave me some simple wisdom as to how to get this thing to stay put, and it did. Now, and I did manage to do that. But that was God, because I had no clue. I had no notion how to go forward with it, but God fixed it. So when I read tonight's Torah portion, for years I've been noting that Joseph was sort of like in that position. It was too perplexing for him. It was such a great set of circumstances. He didn't know what to do, but as he trusted God step by step, God revealed, he gave Joseph the opening as to what he was about to do and allowed him to see it. That's clearly the case here with Judah, because Judah is acting unexpectedly. He's actually surprising Joseph. Now remember the story, right? When Joseph was in that pit, it was Judah who recommended that he should be sold into slavery. So from a certain, probably from Joseph's perspective, Judah was not so helpful, because Judah recommended that he be sold into slavery. Reuben suggested that they don't actually do what they were doing, that the brothers would not actually continue with what they were doing. That was Reuben's suggestion, but Reuben wasn't strong enough. He wasn't firm enough. He wasn't assertive and aggressive enough. So Judah recommended selling him into slavery. So Joseph is probably standing there and saying, here is Judah who sold me out into slavery. But at some point, I'm convinced, at some point, Joseph realized that it was all God's plan. Especially as Judah stepped up and proved himself to be the leader. And he began to prove himself as not just the leader, but the spiritual leader of all the brothers. I think that's when Joseph began to realize that this is the direction that God is taking this. So all these things are happening. Then Judah now, at the end of this process with Benjamin, the cup in the bag of in Benjamin's bag, Judah now, let's read here. Judah's his moving forward, his stepping up in chapter 40, 43, 30, 33, and 34. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me? For fear that I will see evil that would overtake my father. Now remember that Judah gave himself as surety. Right? Reuben had an idea, which was to give to, you can take my two sons, you can offer them up, you can kill them if I don't bring Benjamin back, right? And Judah said, no, I will give myself as a surety, and that's what he did. So here he's acting upon that promise. He's laying himself down before Joseph, before Pharaoh, as far as he's concerned. To be a slave, he's given his life. Now, this was the point when Joseph couldn't take it anymore. To this point, Joseph is incognito. He's not revealing his true identity. But at this point, when Judah put himself in that place and acted on what he had already began to initiate by giving himself a surety, that's when Joseph couldn't control himself, and he had to reveal himself at that point. So now in verse 45, then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried. He cried out now to his servants, have everyone go out from me. So there was no man with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard of it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. So at this point, none of his brothers came even close to recognizing him. There wasn't even a suspicion that this might be Joseph. Joseph had so transformed into that person, that personage of next to Pharaoh, that they were completely fooled by him. And suddenly he reveals himself with emotion. It is me, Joseph, and inquires directly of his father. And they were all perplexed. They were all amazed, dismayed by what has happened. Then Joseph said to his brothers, please come closer to me. And they came close, and he said to them, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. So could you imagine what that room must have been like? The 11 brothers of Joseph standing there with him, weeping, emotion poured out. The intensity of the fear of what has happened, all of these emotions are just swirling around in that room. And Joseph is forgiven. You see, Joseph had every reason, every right to be upset. But he saw the hand of God to be revengeful. But he saw the hand of God, and he saw, what we're going to see here in a few minutes is that he saw that there was a great plan, that God had a plan in place. And he trusted in that plan. Now what's important here is to see that Joseph, perhaps himself, this is what I believe, perhaps himself, did not see where God was going at all, but he trusted him. He trusted him. And when Judah laid himself down before him, that's when he knew that the time had come to reveal himself. Now we know, of course, that, and we've said this many times, that Joseph here is a type, an archetype of Messiah. And the story of Joseph being the second to Pharaoh, who was sent away by his brothers, rejected by his brothers. As far as they were concerned, he was killed, he was gone. You know, you think about it, they would think, okay, so we sold him into Egypt. So he's alive somewhere in Egypt, they would think. But I think perhaps they thought that he was dead. He was gone. They had him completely erased in their minds, right? And so here he is now. So Joseph is a type of Messiah. Points to the fact that Jesus was rejected by his brothers, by the house of Israel. And from the standpoint of his brothers, he was killed. And Jesus was offered up because of who he was. Because he was the Redeemer. Like Joseph was the Redeemer, like Joseph was the one to bring redemption and to bring deliverance to Israel, Jesus was rejected by his brothers, killed, and sent away, where he would become second to God. So the typology there is really clear. Becomes second to God, so that he can be the Redeemer of Israel. The one who will bring salvation to the people of Israel, and not just Israel, but the entire world. How does that compare to Joseph? Well, Joseph brought salvation through the anointing and his being rejected from his brothers. He brought salvation to the entire world, to all of Egypt. Egypt is a type of the world. How did he do that? Because of last week's Torah portion with his dreams, right? With the dreams that Pharaoh had, his interpretation of the dreams, and of course the wisdom that he had in regards to storing up wheat for 7 years and so on. So Joseph becomes this messianic figure, this messianic being, and brings salvation to the world, Egypt, and of course also to Israel. So here now is the moment when Joseph reveals who he is to his brothers. What does that tell us as it relates to this analogy of Joseph being a type of Jesus? That Jesus himself will reveal himself to his brothers. I want you to note here that Joseph specifically said to everyone in the room who was not Israeli to leave. And that he wanted to reserve the right of revelation of himself to himself, and that's what he did. He didn't want anyone else involved in it. He revealed him, and that's exactly what Jesus will do. Jesus will reveal himself to Israel himself, and he will not rely on anyone else, any other movement, to do it. He will expose himself. He will reveal himself to Israel. In Zechariah chapter 12, I think we all know the verses. They will look upon him who they've pierced. And what does that mean? It means that he has extended himself to them. They would look upon him. I want to tell you that's exactly what we're looking at tonight when Joseph revealed who he was to his brothers. Zechariah chapter 12 is that moment in fulfillment. And Jesus will reveal his wounds, who he is, to the people of Israel. And what did it lead to? It led to emotions being poured out. It led to joy, perhaps. Yeah, for sure. Let's read now concerning what Joseph had to say about this. Joseph begins to lend an incredible amount of wisdom to his brothers because he realizes that his brothers are deeply troubled over this, and he wants to comfort them. So the next several verses is Joseph's response to his brothers. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. Can you see how that applies to Jesus and the rejection of Jesus? Of course. For the famine has been in the land in these 2 years, and there is still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth, and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. That word there, deliverance, is not the typical word for deliverance in Hebrew. It's philata. Philata, or phileta. It means to escape, or to cause to escape. So that word there, where it says that God has kept you alive by a great deliverance, tilata means an escape or a remnant. God has kept Israel to be a remnant through Joseph. To escape. To escape what? Well, famine, endless famine and hopelessness. Now therefore it was not you who sent me here, but God. For he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and a lord of all his household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. So Joseph, being a young man, he's like a father to Pharaoh. And he's a ruler over all of Egypt. There is evidence in Egyptian archaeology, I guess you can say, archaeology, of this person, Joseph. And I can't remember his name now in the Egyptian language, but his name is represented, and he is, in fact, Joseph. He was there. So again, it is not you, but it's God who sent me before you. Hurry up. He's now, verse 9. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all of Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. Could you imagine what that announcement must have been like? For Joseph, for Jacob, for Israel. As far as he knows, Joseph is dead. And he wasn't even sure if he would see all of his 11 remaining sons after this journey. And they all come back, and they come back with great news, with incredible news. Joseph, your son, is alive, and he is, in fact, ruler of all of Egypt. Do you think that Jacob praised God? Amen. Do you think that Jacob began to fully and completely understand God's blessings upon him? Remember that Jacob had promises given to him by God. Israel. He became Israel. Came back into the land based on all those promises, awaiting God's fulfillment of those promises. And here, all of a sudden, where he's thinking for sure, those blessings are no longer appropriate because look at what has happened to me. I've lost Joseph. And I'm probably going to lose another son. So instead of him being in such a predicament, suddenly he realizes that Joseph is alive and everything is wonderful. Beyond wonderful, my son is the ruler he's Pharaoh. So that must have been quite a revelation for Israel. So God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You shall live in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children and your flocks and your herds and all that you have. There I will also provide for you, for there are still 5 years of famine to come, and you and your household and all that you have would be impoverished. Behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of your brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth which is speaking to you. I guess he's saying, now you recognize my voice. Now you must tell my father and all my splendor in Egypt, and all that you have seen, and you must hurry and bring my father down here. Then he fell on his brother's Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept on them, and afterwards his brothers talked with him. What a reconciliation. What an incredible moment of reconciliation. They're weeping on each other's neck. They're speaking in their native language. All of a sudden, Joseph is speaking Hebrew to them, and they're having this wonderful time. I want you to take that and appropriate that to what it would be like when Jesus comes. Think of all the suffering of the people of Israel over the last 2 millennia. Actually, 2.5 millennia. All of the incredible persecution that's been put upon them. And suddenly, their Messiah comes, and they realize that he is king of the world. He's Pharaoh. He's king of the entire world. Do you think that the people of Israel's response would be just like Israel's response, Yaakov's response, when he found out that his offspring was king of the world? You see, Yeshua is an offspring of Israel, is he not? The Bible tells us that he is. Yes, he's an offspring of Israel. He's a son of Israel, a Bene Israel. And right now Israel is in a place where things are questionable in terms of their future. They've been there for 2,500 years. They've existed in that place of questionability. What will be tomorrow? It's no different today. Benjamin Netanyahu is in power and things are looking up a little bit from a certain perspective. But the liberal movement in Israel is gaining strength and momentum, political strength and momentum. So the future of Israel is bleak, always has been bleak since the time of the diaspora. But God is preparing this incredible event when he will reveal who his son is, king of the world. The ruler of all humanity. He's going to reign in the midst of Israel with the people of Israel. And there's going to be an incredible reconciliation time, just like what we see here with Joseph. Do you think that Jesus would say exactly what Joseph said to his brothers? That God has sent me before you to prepare a great deliverance? What do you think? Absolutely. I would venture to say that Yeshua, Jesus, is longing for this moment when he will say to his brothers that God has sent me before you. This was God's plan. This was God's determination from the very beginning that this would occur. Unlike Joseph, Yeshua, Jesus, knew exactly step by step what God would do. His faith was perfect. Joseph's faith apparently was a little bit shaky, but he followed after God step by step nonetheless. My faith is lacking compared to Joseph. But like I did with Isaac, I started off saying there's no way I can fix this thing. It's missing parts. That's impossible. God spoke to me, I obeyed, and it was fixed. That's my weak faith, my weakness being complemented by God's power. Well, with Yeshua, he has perfect faith. His faith is exactly the faith that we should aspire for. He knows every step that God has taken in his great plan of redemption. And he's rejoicing in it. He's at God's right hand waiting for this incredible moment when God will say it's time, when God will say it is time to reveal who you are to your brothers. You know, the marriage supper of the Lamb happens, right? We know it. I talked about it last Sunday. The marriage supper of the Lamb comes, the bride makes herself ready. There's going to be an incredible rejoicing, a time of revelry in the nation of Israel when Jesus shows up. Because the great Messiah that they await will be much greater than they anticipate. Right now, there's a young man in Israel that they're believing can be the Messiah. He's like 35 years old, and he fits the bill as Messiah, and the Orthodox Jews are looking at him, considering another false Messiah. He will fall way short of being the Messiah, and about 5 or 10 years, they will come to that awareness, well, he wasn't the Messiah, we need to look for someone else. And that's kind of where Israel is right now. But they're genuinely looking for the help that will come from God through their Mashiach. They're genuinely looking. They're expecting. They've been there for 2,500 years, expecting, particularly 2,000 years, expecting Mashiach to come. During the horrible years of the Spanish Inquisition, all of the pogroms and everything else, the cry of the Jewish people was consistent. God, send your Messiah, the ones who would believe. And so here's that time. God will send his Messiah. Yeshua will come. He will reveal himself to Israel. There would be rejoicing. There would be a reverent spirit because of what God has done. And they will see him as the great Redeemer that Joseph was, but much greater, much more profound. You see, think about what Armageddon is, folks. This great conflict that we're all staring down right now. Think about what that is. You know the river Euphrates is drying up. You know that. That's in concordance, that's in alignment with Revelation chapter 9 and chapter 16. Very vivid. When this happens, it means that the way for the kings of the east is being prepared. So for the first time in the existence of the Euphrates, it's dry. And the scientists and the researchers are wondering what's happening. There's no apparent reason for the river to run dry, but it is. They're perplexed. Well, we know what that means. The sign is clear. The revelation is obvious. God's preparing to send his son. And there's going to be a great revelation to Israel when he comes. Just about every religious movement that has come upon the scene has taken it upon themselves to convert the Jewish people to Christianity. Is that true? I mean, it's true, right? It's always been that way ever since Christianity came into existence. And they've always failed. And they will always fail until Jesus comes. And like Joseph, he's going to expose himself, he's going to reveal himself to Israel. We will have no misgivings then. Sometimes we wonder, hey, maybe Christianity should do a better job. Maybe we Christians should be more aggressive about converting Jews and revealing Jesus to them. That's futile. The history of Christianity tells us how futile that is. Only Jesus will do it, and we will be there. And it will be a time of incredible revelry and rejoicing. Israel awaits it. Their Messiah will be much more than what they expect. Many, many times more profound, more powerful than what they expect. They don't expect you, that's for sure. They don't expect coming with the Messiah is his bride. Consider what that would be like. That the Messiah of Israel, the great king, shows up with a bride, a people, a priesthood, called out from every kindred, tongue, and nation, alongside him, working, fighting, warring on their behalf. Think about what that might be like. How will that sit with the people of Israel? That an entire people are coming with him as a bride, a bridal arrival. A people that will reign with him as a royal priesthood. There's some wonderful, wonderful events set before us. Tremendous, wonderful events that God has set before each of us. Did we deserve it? No. Did we do anything to merit it? No. But he has given us that opportunity. What is necessary for us? For us to be a part of this great, incredible revelation that's set before us. To be faithful with what God has given you, to follow after his word. When he says do something, you do it. When he says hold, stop, you stop. He's faithful. He will tell us when to go, when not to go. That's God. So simple little message about Joseph and how he responded to God, and how ultimately he had the full insight of seeing himself as being the Redeemer of Israel, the one who will save Israel and save the entire world. So God has sent Joseph, Yeshua, before the people of Israel, suffering in order that he can return as a Messiah to redeem Israel. You're a part of that. You're going to facilitate that incredible event when you come with him. Praise God. So pray for your brothers and sisters, please. We want our brothers and sisters to be here and whole. There is a pressing away happening. People are being pushed off. Maybe it has to happen. But pray that God's will would be accomplished. It is incumbent upon each of us to press in even more now, to become more fervent, stronger, more determined. God will reward that. He will reward that. So let me encourage you, Sunday morning we're going to come out and pray. Let me encourage you to be a part of that prayer meeting. It's only 7:30. Shabbat Shalom.